Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Wes Streeting has turned on Keir Starmer, calling on him to resign after the Makerfield by-election. Donald Trump claims the US-Iran peace deal will leave the Strait of Hormuz open and toll-free. He's also taking credit for being Israel's biggest enabler. More on that later. And FIFA tells Iranian monarchists to hide their colours at the World Cup. I'm Aaron Bastani. Some have been saying Ayatollah Bastani with this beard I'm growing. And I'm joined tonight by Michael Walker. Michael, how are we?
Who's been saying that?
A colleague of ours.
I love it. I'm very well. Looking forward to discussing those Trump comments about Israel. I was sort of listening to them, nodding along, violently agreeing on the way here today, which I don't normally do when Trump's speaking.
Yeah, they're great stories today. They're great stories. And for once, they're not all miserable. Well, the last one at least is rather fun. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you can, of course, sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And of course, this show is not just about Michael and me and all our wonderful team here at Novara Towers. It's also about you. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Until a few weeks ago, Wes Streeting was one of the most important members of Keir Starmer's cabinet. A highly factional player on the right of the Labour Party, Streeting, the MP for Ilford North, was the Secretary of State for Health. That was until he resigned from the job in the middle of May. And today he called on the Prime Minister to resign. That was from a speech he gave in central London on progressive capitalism and his vision to renew the British economy. Streeting also said he had the numbers to mount a leadership challenge, with the magic number being 81 Labour MPs to trigger that contest. And again, he's been saying that for months, and it's increasingly unclear whether it's actually true. The bulk of that speech was published in the Financial Times a few days ago, with Streeting making his pitch to the business elite as to why he, and not Andy Burnham, is the best bet for both the party and the country. He starts that piece saying that for the first time in our modern history as a country, the prospects for the next generation look worse than the last. It's 2026, and I'm pretty sure I've been hearing that line since at least 2010, but there you go, at least he's saying it. He said one thing, however, that really did stand out to me. The Greens reject growth. Their policies would see society fighting over an ever-shrinking pie. The right think the market should be left untouched. I'm putting forward an agenda for progressive capitalism that backs enterprise, rewards work, takes on vested interests, and makes markets serve our shared goals of growth, fairness, and a better future for the next generation. That sounds great. I can see Michael Walker nodding furiously. He's going to have to stop. He might hurt himself. But here's the thing. It's also exactly what Keir Starmer said. Wes Streeting did say, however, that he would also approve new oil and gas sites in the North Sea. That's something a bit different to the premiership we've seen since 2024. He added this. The tax receipts from new North Sea oil and gas approvals should be funneled into cheaper energy, insulation, heat pumps, and electrification to cut bills and emissions. We must show that the net zero and growth agendas are not in competition. Finally, Streeting said he wants to equalise tax on wealth and work, something he's talked about before with increases to capital gains tax, CGT. In an overt swipe at Burnham, Streeting said he didn't believe we've been going through 40 years of neoliberal failure, and added a line that bond markets are not Bond villains. I don't really like that, but you know what? It sticks. It's certainly very Wes Streeting. The former health secretary also criticised Reeves for tinkering around the edges. Starmer, Miliband, Rachel Reeves, Andy Burnham, all of them were in Wes Streeting's sights earlier today. But the key line was this one. When the results are in, I hope the Prime Minister will reflect on his own position and set out a timetable. In other words, in the aftermath of the Makerfield by-election on Thursday, Wes Streeting is saying, for heaven's sake, man, go. Michael, it wasn't that long ago that Wes Streeting was besties with Liz Kendall and Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. Certainly those first two was very much on the right of the party.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been quite a while, though, hasn't it, that he has been angling for the leadership. I mean, there are many instances where people think he has blown his chances by being too explicit. For example, many people thought he was behind Anas Sarwar sort of coming out and saying Keir Starmer should go. So I don't think it's particularly surprising that today he's come out and said that Keir Starmer should resign. What's, I suppose, the unknown is whether he really does have these 81 nominations, or if Andy Burnham wins the by-election MPs will think we don't want a contest right now. What's the point in giving Wes Streeting the nominations when he's only going to lose anyway?
But the attacks on Reeves, they're new.
Well, everyone's got to attack. Whoever takes over the Labour Party has to show that they're somehow different. I mean, the big problem for Wes Streeting, I think, is that there was very little in the speech or in the article which is different from what Keir Starmer was saying when he was running for the leadership and then to become Prime Minister. So sort of Wes Streeting, the byline of the FT piece, which he sort of repeats in it, he says, we must be as focused on wealth creation as wealth distribution. And he says, growth and fairness aren't in competition. Now, that might make sense if he were sort of standing against a very left-wing Labour leader who thought that the main thing we have to do is distribute. Growth is, if there was a Labour leader who had been saying, we've been focused too much on growth over the past 20 years, what we really need to talk about is fairness and redistribution, then, that would be a different pitch from Wes Streeting. But what Keir Starmer said in the run-up to the last election was his number one priority was growth. He said growth, growth, growth. So Wes Streeting, can't come out now, give this big grand speech in a fancy location and say, I'm really original because I want economic growth, right? There's obviously an issue whereby growth is very difficult to achieve in Britain. Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer both wanted it. Nothing, I think, that Wes Streeting has said they would find offensive, yet they have floundered. So Wes Streeting has to explain why he would bring about growth where they failed, and I think he hasn't done that.
So you said that he's basically regurgitating all the talking points we heard from Keir Starmer ahead of 2024. The big macro picture is, I want growth, but I'm also not a meanie Tory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's play for play what Starmer was saying, right? Growth, growth, growth. But there is a big point of difference in terms of what he's saying about North Sea oil and gas. Big difference, right? He's saying actually maybe net zero, the target with regards to electricity, all coming from non-fossil fuels by 2030, that's no good. More North Sea oil and gas approvals, that can go into electrification. And by the way, I wouldn't approve more North Sea oil sites, but if I was going to do it, that's exactly where I'd spend the money, would be electrification and insulation, a social justice kind of agenda, but also a zero carbon one, also an energy security one. I think Michael wasn't throwing something there in anger, it fell off the shelf. Where's your position on that? Because that won't be very popular with the Labour electorate, but I bet a lot that the business lobby that he was speaking to today would be very happy to hear that stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, the argument that people are consistently making as to why Britain is struggling with growth is that energy is too expensive. And I suppose that's one area where he's trying to distinguish himself from Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. I mean, personally think that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves wouldn't mind giving out some new licenses for North Sea oil and gas anyway. I mean, to me, it's probably a bit of a distraction. I can see why people make the argument. I think sort of the most important thing we can do to move towards a net zero economy is massively invest in electrification, importing and then developing our own technology. And I suppose, to me, the North Sea oil and gas, I'm not quite as passionate about it as many other people are. I suppose the argument is that we'd be setting a precedent and then everyone else is going to rush to
You're not as passionate about not...
I'm not as passionate about not doing it as other people are. Because I do think the argument he makes, which is true, is that if you want people to follow Britain's example, then Britain has to look like a place that raced towards net zero, and it worked. If people look at Britain as the example of a country that raced towards net zero, and everyone got poorer and the government was really unpopular, like if we're leading by the power of our example,
it's a great
our
point.
example has to be a good one, right? And so if you can seriously make the argument that yes, we're racing ahead with electrification, we're racing ahead with renewables, and we are also doing a bit of new coal and not coal. We shouldn't do new coal. We are doing a bit of new oil and gas, but we'll get there in the end, and our industry is still healthy. That probably would be better, but I don't think opening. I suppose I'm not as passionate about not having these new oil and gas as some other people are. I also don't think it's going to fix very much if we start doing that.
No, the tax receipts would be like 10, 20 billion or something.
Exactly. The big challenges that the UK faces is building stuff, and Wes Streeting really hasn't moved beyond Keir Starmer on that. So he's saying that he wants a bit more centralisation, actually, is what he was saying in the article. He's going to force more councils to approve more housing. Now, the issue is, the reason why enough housing isn't getting built at the moment, some of it is NIMBYs, but the main reason is no one wants to build houses because there's no one to buy the houses at the price that they currently are selling for. So what you need is councils and the state to be able to come in and build some in the downturn. We're in a housing downturn. We need to build some. Now, he doesn't have anything to say about that because it would cost money and that's politically difficult.
And also, and we'll move on in a second because ultimately Wes Streeting isn't the biggest story of the moment. He certainly will be after Thursday. That's why we're leading with this tonight, of course, because it's paving the way for a huge political debate in the aftermath of potentially Andy Burnham winning. We'll be covering that, by the way, on Thursday. More about that later. But I think it's really fair. Read the article, read the basis of what became the speech, and you think this boy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's never actually worked in finance. Not that I think you should work in finance, but if you're going to talk in detail about bond markets, have some experience. He's never started a business. Never really worked in the private sector beyond I think he worked for a consultancy or something. And he's not got much of a theoretical interest in capitalism and how it works. So it just all seems very surface level and going through the motions, Blairite bullshit, if I'm honest. At least with Blair, he was talking to movers and shakers in the 90s, and they were sort of getting a bit of a grip on the quote-unquote new economy. I don't even get that with Streeting.
Yeah, it all seems
it's a LARP.
It seems shallow and superficial. I mean,
super shallow.
I think the reason why speeches aren't very good for Streeting is because the one argument he has as to why he could do a better job than Keir Starmer is that he is a better communicator, and especially in interviews, he can seem more human and more quick on his feet. Starmer always looks very awkward. Streeting seems like the kind of guy who, if you give him an argument, he's going to be better at persuading the interlocutor than Keir Starmer is. But speeches, when you've got to set out your stall, when you've got to set out your ideas, your visions. I was listening to Streeting's one. He kept stumbling, actually, across. It was probably a problem with the auto cue, I'm not sure, but he kept stumbling. Didn't really seem like he believed in it. Wasn't emphasizing the right words. And that's because I don't think he believes him very much. He isn't coming to this position with a real stance on what needs to change in the country. He's quite reasonably saying, I'm a better communicator than Keir Starmer, so I should replace him. The problem is he's going to be up against someone who's also a better communicator than Keir Starmer, Andy Burnham, if Andy Burnham wins in the by-election. And Andy Burnham has a bit more to say about the British economy.
Yeah, devolution.
Exactly.
For instance, right?
Which Wes Streeting didn't say anything about, by the way.
No. Shallow is the word, Michael. I like it. Shallow is the word. I remember Peter Carl once saying that the reason why people should back Keir Starmer is approachability. He's approachable. You can't run a G7 economy just because you're approachable. It's a nice to have. It's not why somebody should be the prime minister. Come on, folks. But I think that really speaks to a low energy, low ideas political class we have in this country right now. It really, really is extraordinary just looking at it, how few ideas people have. Burnham doesn't have many, but he stands out for having at least a few. US President Donald Trump is attending a G7 summit in France where he's been giving a little more detail about the memorandum of understanding that was agreed on Monday with Iran. So far, the details have been sketchy. We know that if the deal is upheld, the US blockade of Iranian ports will end, the Strait of Hormuz will open, and a 60-day ceasefire will begin, during which time Iran's nuclear future will be negotiated. At a bilateral session with the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Trump had this to say on that thorny last topic.
We appreciate the relationship we've had over the short period of time with Iran. The primary thing is, we can talk about the Iran deal all day long. We're not investing any money. We have the right to if we want, but we're not investing any money. We didn't pay for it like Obama did. He paid billions of dollars. He paid $1.7 billion from an airplane, all green cash. It was crazy. I watched that. I couldn't believe it. But the one thing that's happening that's of note, frankly, the only thing that really matters to me, is Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. And it says it loud and clear. They're not going to develop it. They're not going to buy it. They're not going to do anything with it. And if they do, they suffer unbelievable consequences. Not just a little bit I won't even tell you the consequences, but the consequences are the ultimate consequences. And with that being said, I hope we have a very good relationship.
What is going on? The ultimate consequences. This is a country which has had its central bank sanctioned since 2012. First country in the world that had its central bank sanctioned. It's locked out of SWIFT. It's been subject to the most vicious economic sanctions for more than 40 years. Of course, it's been literally bombed by arguably two of the world's most effective air forces. Not just this year, but last year as well. School children were killed. Families were killed. Senior political officials were killed. Military officers were killed. So it's hard to understand what he means when he says, well, if they do seek to build a nuclear weapon, we will do X. America has thrown everything at Iran. That's the point. It hasn't worked, and that's why we're having these negotiations. Of course, things are always more complicated than Mr. Trump says. Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shia group that has both a political wing in Lebanon's parliament as well as a large fighting force in the south of the country, has released a statement on an Iranian nuclear deal. In it, they say they've received assurances from Tehran that, quote, there will be no nuclear deal between Iran and the United States unless the Israelis withdraw. Israeli troops currently occupy large areas of southern Lebanon, amounting to around a fifth of the country's area as a whole. And Hezbollah's statement appeared to be affirmed by Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, who said this in Tehran today. The important point I want to emphasize here is that, in our view, there are two parties to this memorandum. One side is America and Israel, and the other side is Iran and Hezbollah. This is perhaps the most important issue in the memorandum, the declaration of an immediate and permanent end to the war on all fronts, including in Lebanon. Such a different framing to how it's reported in the UK, isn't it? This is a memorandum regarding two sides, and there are two parts to both sides. Trump has plenty to say as well on the topic of Israel in Lebanon. Asked whether the deal could survive if Israel attacks the country, Trump said this.
I consider that the minor war, Iran's the big one, but we have that little pinprick out there that constantly rears its head, and that's Hezbollah. And, I was very responsible for Syria, and the man that's running Syria now is a person that I put there along with President Erdogan and some others. He's done an amazing job of pulling it together. He's not a Boy Scout, but he's done an amazing job of pulling it together. And he is very good with Hezbollah, does not like them. And I'll tell you what, Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody, because there are a lot of people in those apartment houses, and they're not all Hezbollah, that I can tell you. And I suggested to Israel to let Syria take care of Hezbollah. Because to be honest with you, I think they do a better job of doing it. And I didn't like Syria. I didn't like where 2 hours before we're signing the agreement that there was an attack in Lebanon, in Beirut. It was right in, it wasn't like in the southern side, and it was in Beirut. I did not like that. I let them know that. I didn't like it, not at all. But I think that Syria, he's pulled that country together amazingly quickly. He's very capable, and he's been very good for me. He's protected everything that I've asked for, he's done. And if Israel can't do the job without killing everyone else, he'll do the job. Syria will do the job.
There's so much I want to say in regard to that clip. So first of all, the idea that the Lebanon-Israel conflict has been a minor conflict. 3,700 Lebanese people have died this year as a result of Israeli attacks on the country. I think about 12,000 people injured. So, same ballpark as 9/11. No American says that 9/11 was a minor thing. And yet it happens in Lebanon. No big deal. And the idea that Ahmed al-Sharaa, formerly a Sunni jihadist called al-Jilani, might be put in charge of eliminating Hezbollah doesn't sound like a very sound path to peace in the region. But the threat could indicate just how difficult Trump's finding it to get the Israelis under control. And the country's senior politicians are only making that more difficult. Last night, Netanyahu set out his own conditions for how things could progress on a US deal with Iran. He posted this. With an agreement, without an agreement, as long as I'm Prime Minister of Israel, Iran will not have nuclear weapons. Responding to the suggestion that Syria could take up Israel's war against Hezbollah instead, Israel's Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, posted this. The idea of abandoning our security into the hands of ISIS terrorists, the beheaders and child murderers, will not happen. Look, this might be the first time I agree with Ben-Gvir. He's right. That is the backbone of the military now of Syria under al-Jilani. Of course, not everyone, but many people are former jihadists. I said about how crazy it is that Trump is minimizing 3,700 people dying. He's also trying to spread a regional war. So his solution to a regional war, which has had a huge impact on the global economy, which has killed thousands of people, his solution is for Syria to get involved. So a country that's just come out of what? Think about this for a minute. A country that's just come out of what? 12 years of civil war? 13 years of civil war? He's now saying they should get embroiled in a sectarian religious conflict with Shia Muslims in Lebanon.
They've also got scores to settle, right? Because Hezbollah was backing Assad in the Syrian civil war. So Jalani would have been sort of directly fighting them.
Yeah. And
for around a decade.
Salafist Sunni Muslims, the last time I checked, aren't the biggest fans of Shia Muslims. So it's a pretty crazy idea on all counts. I mean, if the Americans start arming Syria, for instance, if they were to start giving military aid, I mean, there would have to be certain carrots here, right? To get embroiled in Lebanon? I mean, that's not the peace president, is it?
He did also elsewhere in that press conference, though, talk about Lebanon as being the hardest done country in the region. So he was speaking quite sympathetically about Lebanon. And I suppose what's, obviously the idea that Syria can take over and al-Jilani can do it is a little bit mad. But the more concrete issue is what he's saying about the country, which actually is now, in reality, bombing Lebanon, ostensibly to destroy Hezbollah, but it looks like they just want to create a buffer zone, essentially, and sort of contribute to this greater Israel project. I suppose it's worth taking a step back and seeing why Israel now finds itself in such a difficult position. Because basically Netanyahu made a big gamble, which was that he wanted to take out the Iranian regime or the Iranian leadership, not just the leadership, actually, because they did kill the leadership, but they haven't killed the regime. He wanted to end the Islamic Republic of Iran while there was an American president who was, I suppose, unstable enough and reckless enough to get involved. He had a big win there. The Americans did get involved. They did kill the supreme leader. But the problem for him is now the Iranian regime survives. It still exists. It's stronger than ever. Donald Trump can see that actually he's just made the biggest foreign policy error of his 2 terms in the White House. The biggest error of his second term is the decision to invade Iran. He knows that he was tricked into that or led to believe that would be a good idea by Benjamin Netanyahu. So now Benjamin Netanyahu is in a situation where he's still got the same people in power in Iran, but the American president is really pissed off at him, which is a very dangerous place to be if you're Israel. And the context, again, is that with this deal, even though the details aren't published, all the indications are, from what Trump said today, from what J.D. Vance said yesterday, that Trump is getting ready to sign up to a deal which looks basically exactly like Obama's one, which is that Iran is going to be able to continue to enrich uranium in its own country, but only up to a certain amount. It was 3.67% under Obama. After the Obama deal was ended by Trump, they started enriching to 60%. So when sort of Trump says, oh, they enriched all of this stuff under Biden, the only reason they were able to enrich was because he ripped up the deal. After this very costly war, he now seems ready to enter into the same deal that Obama had. But you've got to remember that same deal that Obama had is what Netanyahu was so pissed off about that he went to Congress and denounced Obama in Washington. So it is a bit of a lose-lose for Netanyahu. And now they've got to make a decision. Do they stand back and let the Obama deal be renegotiated, re-agreed over the next 60 days? Or do they try and play spoiler by continuing the bombardment of Lebanon and presumably only further angering the American president? So they're in a bind.
All this because Obama made a joke at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, tearing up one of the most successful pieces of American diplomacy in the 21st century, and then just going back to it. Really remarkable. Before we carry on with this, I just want to go to some super chats. Annie Thompson, 3683, £5. Streeting isn't being very climate friendly with all the bridges he's setting fire to. I love that book by Norman Finkelstein. I'll burn that bridge when I come to it. I've not read it before, but it's a great title. That's kind of Streeting's approach right now, isn't it? Like I say, the Reeves, Starmer, Burnham, Miliband. I'll burn that bridge when I come to it. The only friend he has left is Michael Walker, of course. That famous video of Michael and Wes Streeting.
Oh, Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh,
yes.
Jeremy Corbyn. At Pride, right?
Yeah. That was just after the 2017 general election. Yeah. So when everyone was sort of willing to reconsider getting on the Corbyn train.
With Wes Streeting. And then at David Smith, DB 5TG with £4.99. Streeting barely won his own seat. That's true. He's only got a majority of 600. And we have no reason to think he's gotten more popular as his party has declined. He should be a non-starter. Although council candidates in his neck of the woods did surprisingly well in the recent local elections, right?
Yeah, that's the argument against that would be that, yes, he did very poorly in that seat in the general election, but Redbridge, which is sort of where he is the MP, actually bucked the trend in the locals in May. So it actually looks so on the basis of that, he can argue that he is more electorally successful than the rest of the Labour Party. Obviously, the fact that he nearly lost the seat goes in the other direction.
But I mean, the reality is, I mean, this is really important after Thursday if Burnham wins, right? And then Starmer gives some kind of timeline to leave. Burnham will have just won a by-election against reform in a seat that was absolutely going to reform. Streeting has a majority of 600. Miliband is in Doncaster. I think he's lost anyway, let's be quite frank. Same with Rayner, where she is. Yvette Cooper, where she is. These aren't very safe seats. I mean, that just compounds the argument for Burnham, doesn't it?
I think Streeting should be understood not as preparing for a campaign against Andy Burnham. Right? I think if Andy Burnham wins, then what Streeting has been doing up to now should be read as, I suppose, building leverage to get a decent position in Andy Burnham's cabinet. And he's also saying, well, if Burnham loses, he's putting himself in a position to challenge Keir Starmer. So I don't think Streeting really believes that he has a chance against Andy Burnham. But by sort of positioning himself as a potential contender, then, yeah, he's, I think in his mind, sort of increasing his leverage either with a Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, or if Burnham loses, to take on Keir Starmer.
Very smart.
So it makes sense. He's doing the right thing.
I mean, all the polling shows that Burnham destroys Streeting. You know, that's a good YouTube thumb. Right? All caps, destroys, but it's also true. Yeah, Streeting would have zero chance against Mr. Burnham, but also I think Keir Starmer. He's just not a very popular person with the Labour electorate. Let's go back to this Trump story. There are many reasons why Donald Trump is very keen to reach a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran and get the Gulf's oil flowing into the international energy markets as quickly as possible. Leading economists have suggested that Kevin Warsh, the new head of the US Federal Reserve, their equivalent of the Bank of England, will have to raise interest rates at least once before the end of the year, after inflation reached a 3-year high in May. That's largely due to rising fuel costs driven by Trump's war on Iran. That may ease short-term inflationary pressures, but others are suggesting it'll take much longer for the world to return to post-Iran war normality, or return to normality after the war with Iran. That's if it ever does. The New York Times global economics editor Patricia Cohen has today argued that the war has permanently altered the world economy. And that's part of a larger shift in the global order. In that piece, she writes this: the profound vulnerability of countries throughout Asia, Europe, and elsewhere that depend on imported energy is supercharging the hunt for alternatives. In some places like South Korea and Japan, that has led to an increased use of dirtier fuels like coal. But over the longer term, this energy shock, the second in just 4 years, is likely to accelerate a transition to renewables like solar and wind, as well as nuclear power. This shift, she thinks, will have one beneficiary above the rest. The push to build out and diversify energy networks is going to continue long after the war ends, and China is poised to benefit most from the expected boon in renewables. It is leagues ahead of the rest of the world in producing wind turbines, high-voltage cables, transformers, solar panels, batteries, software to manage energy flows, and more. China's increasing role in ensuring that other countries have a dependable supply of energy amplifies its strategic influence and importance. The Trump administration's position on renewables has, in the context of its war on Iran, not been wise, argues Cohen. She goes on to say this: the Trump administration's aggressive push to halt renewables energy projects, even paying companies to cancel wind farms, means the United States is essentially withdrawing from its global competition and ceding the industrial and technological advantage to its biggest rival. The economic advantages are reinforced by geopolitical ones. The war has deepened the wedge between the US and longtime allies in Europe, providing another opening for China to enlarge its role as an international leader. Fascinating. Michael, will Donald Trump, number 47, be remembered as the net zero president, the man who kept this world below 2 degrees of warming?
No. I mean, also, I think it doesn't look like we are going to keep below 2 degrees of warming. We are moving in the right direction, but we're not doing it fast enough. I mean, in terms of the case that you're making is that by starting this war, he has accelerated the move in the rest of the world towards green energy, as the article pointed out, and there was a similar situation after Russia invaded Ukraine. So the immediate consequence of those wars is for countries either to rush to dirtier forms of fuel, like coal, or to push to open gas and oil fields like is happening in the UK. So there is that sort of initial rush to say, actually, can we afford the green agenda anymore in the short term? But then in the longer term, it strengthens the argument for those people who want to move towards renewables so that you can make yourself and your energy prices independent of geopolitical sort of conflicts like Russia, Ukraine, like the US and Israel versus Iran, or their sort of illegal attack on Iran. I don't want to make it sound like a wrestling match. So that's true. I think the point she makes, so the argument against Donald Trump, I mean, there are many arguments against Donald Trump as the climate change president. For one, that he doesn't believe in it. But if you're looking at what has been the consequence of his presidency for the green transition, you would say that Biden was putting the Americans in a position to subsidize their own green industrial revolution. That was the idea. And Trump has cancelled all that. Now, I think the reality is there wasn't much indication that Joe Biden was actually making America competitive when it came to green energy. Like China are just miles and miles and miles in advance. So that wasn't really a question about a green transition. That was a question about American autonomy and whether they would have any. So I don't actually think sort of the dumping of Biden's green subsidies will have that much of an impact on the transition to net zero. So there is an argument that Trump's presidency won't be as consequential when it comes to climate as some people had feared, basically because China is doing all the legwork, and that's where the transition is going to come from.
I think this is key. I don't think people realize how significant China is. You know, in terms of its capacity, wind, solar, nuclear, hydroelectric, it's adding more capacity than the rest of the world combined. Basically every year. I think it now produces something like, I could be wrong, I mean, it's all these numbers are between 70 and 90%, you know. I think it's 9 out of every 10 solar panels globally is produced in China. 75% of lithium-ion batteries. Same with EVs now, I think. High-speed rail, of course, it's a global leader. And I think you're right. This idea that, well, America hasn't done it, therefore the world's imperiled. I actually, obviously, it's a huge deal. America's the world's largest economy. America walking back from its climate change commitments is a bad thing. But I do think, given the industrial might of China and what it's achieved, say, in the last decade, I do think people pay too much attention to what the United States does. If China guarantees the world that electric vehicles are cheaper to run than petrol ones, doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters for America because it's 350 million people, number one consumer of energy worldwide. But in the context of 8 billion people, cheap solar panels, cheap batteries, cheap EVs, you know, cheap infrastructure for public transport. I would love the Chinese to be helping us with HS2 right now. Is extraordinarily important. And I think the British media so far, that's beginning to change, is inclined to underplay that because implicitly then you're acknowledging that the Chinese development model actually works and the Chinese Communist Party getting some things right. This is my jumping off point for Michael Walker to eulogize the country and, of course, his much famed trip recently to China. Okay. Is that fair? You know, there's a bias within British journalism, I think probably up until the EV story, until electric vehicles. You couldn't really say actually China was doing extraordinary things in these technologies because then you'd sound too much like a cheerleader.
You know, I think that's exactly right. I think it's also that, you know, there's an extent to which, and I think this has come from the left as well, the left and sort of mainstream journalism, which is to think that climate is going to be solved by agreements. And obviously when it came to agreements, it has been the United States that has been the big blockage, you know, ever since the Kyoto protocols came about. I do think that we would be in a much better position to deal with climate change and would have done so earlier if it hadn't been for George W. Bush beating Al Gore in that election. So they're definitely sort of, the fact that it's taken us this long to deal with climate change does have a lot to do with America blocking political solutions. But we sort of moved past the point of political solutions. And we are in the realm where sort of climate change is more about industrial policy, and industrial policy obviously comes from China, not from the Americans, right? And in terms of, you know, there's always, you know, when I say we're moving in the right direction, there's always people saying, no, that's insane, we're definitely not. Last year was the first year that energy produced by fossil fuels declined in a year when overall energy use hadn't declined. So it has declined in the past, but that was sort of the 2008 financial crisis, that was COVID, that was for bad reasons, right? We don't want energy consumption to fall because energy consumption is prosperity, right? We want energy consumption to continue to rise across the world, especially in the developing world. But last year was the first time where energy consumption did rise, good, but fossil fuel energy consumption fell. And that's because all new demand was met by the increase in renewables, which is a good story, right? The bad story is that climate change is happening quite fast and we're weaning ourselves off fossil fuels a bit too slowly. But we are moving in the right direction. And that is because of China, essentially.
Yeah, there are some people in the comments talking about AMOC,
Yeah.
which is basically about the unique conditions we get in Northern Europe. Our climatic conditions here are warmer than they should be because of the Gulf Stream. And actually, even if there is net planetary warming, even if global temperatures rise by 2 degrees or 3 degrees to 4 degrees, if that changes, Britain and some other places too could get much, much colder. There was a great write-up in the FT Weekend magazine last year, great article about this. And it's true that, on one timeline, Britain ends up with like a Mediterranean climate. And I'm not saying that's a great thing because, of course, the Mediterranean becomes a desert. But there's another timeline where we end up with a climate closer to, Iceland.
There was also, because last year there was that great long read in the Financial Times, which was a bit speculative, right? Sort of saying this is what could happen plausibly. This summer there was like an even scarier article in Nature, which was showing that the whole globe has heated up. So they show you a heat map, apart from this one sort of spot at the center of AMOC, which has cooled. So it does already look like there is this kind of uneven warming and cooling, which could lead to Britain becoming incredibly cold. I think maybe 15 degrees colder, which would be very bad. This is obviously why I'm, sometimes open to geoengineering, but also it
well, I think even the skeptics, if we started to get winter at minus 25 degrees in London, I think even the skeptics would say, Michael Walker, get the drones, do the
because what we need
cloud dust.
We need to buy ourselves time. The other thing that people talk a lot about, which I think makes a lot of sense, is to buy us time, we could take much more sort of extreme action on methane, because methane is very short acting, but it's a very powerful sorry, I don't mean fossil fuel gas. Greenhouse gas, sorry, that's what I was looking for. So if we go very hard on methane, that could also buy us some time. Big sort of contributor to methane is fracking. So that's where, Obama actually has a lot to answer for, because he was the president that sort of permitted the fracking revolution to happen in North America.
Fracking and coal cannot happen, folks. I know we're now having a conversation because of Wesley Streeting about oil and gas, but fracking, precisely because of the methane, is no bueno.
If anyone's wondering, methane enters the atmosphere if the natural gas gets out before we burn it.
Yeah.
And the fracking, it seeps out of the earth because of these little explosions. So that's why sort of fracking poses a particular problem.
Which is also the problem with Siberian permafrost melting, because loads of methane comes out there as well. We have to buy time.
We definitely need to brighten some clouds above that permafrost.
Well, look, this is exactly the sort of Michael Walker opinion people get angry about, but I think you're right. Look, I don't want minus 20 here. We've also had a story today developing about a Russian attack in the English Channel. And I do think that the fact the conversation now is moving towards energy security, the destabilization of global commodity chains, supply chains. I think that's a good conversation to have, and I think it means climate and energy security isn't just a left-coded issue. Now you're having right-wing people who didn't really like to talk about it before saying, maybe we should be producing more of our own microprocessors. Not all of them, because we can't. They're very, it's a tough industry. Some. Yeah, maybe we should actually have 70% of our energy mix coming from renewables. I think we should still have some gas, but and we would disagree with that, or I would disagree with that, certainly. I would say nuclear. But they're now saying things because of the sort of breakdown of the geopolitical order with Trump that they weren't saying before. And it's important to bring this all together, which is the point of Novara Media. To bring all these disparate conversations together. If you like what we're doing, you can, of course, support our work. Go to novara.media/support. Help us build a new media for different politics. We've been trying to add new supporters in recent weeks. We're doing rather well. Our target was 2,000. We got there very quickly. We've now upgraded it to 5,000. That's our stretch goal. Join Michael Walker's Barmy Army. The link is in the description below. Just click it. £1 a month. I've been told not to talk about various other organizations you can give money to and my own personal direct debits, but I'm sure you have some. Add Novara Media to that list, or maybe get rid of one of them. And
have you been told to stop promoting the RSPB?
Yeah.
Are you National Trust as well?
National
Is this
Trust,
part of your
National Trust,
core agenda?
English heritage. Full house.
On your previous point, I just wanted to, I'm sure we'll talk about it tomorrow at length, actually. The French government, which is hardly left-wing, has just kicked Palantir out of its military, not based on sort of ideological opposition to Peter Thiel, but because they have decided they want to have strategic autonomy, and this is too important a sector to allow it to be based in Washington.
Yeah. I say this to right-wingers all the time, when I'm saying, look, we don't want Meta, we don't want Palantir, we don't want, Amazon Web Services, blah, blah, blah. They say, why do you hate America so much? And I'm saying, you're capitalists. Why don't you want British companies to be creating billionaires rather than American ones? Crazy. But because the left says one thing, negative polarization means they have to say the other, even if it doesn't make sense with their purported worldview. US President Donald Trump is rarely a man who minces his words, whatever you think of them. And today, at a G7 summit in Qatar, he made a claim that is 100% true. Though never before, as far as we know, has it been publicly stated aloud by a senior politician from the West. The context was a question about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's repeated attacks on Lebanon, despite Israel's withdrawal from the country being a condition of Trump's peace deal with Iran. Trump was particularly annoyed about an Israeli attack conducted against an apartment building in Beirut on Sunday, just as Iran and the US were progressing their negotiations on a ceasefire. That's part of a pattern that Israel has repeated on several occasions, with Trump also criticizing their habit of blowing up entire apartment blocks housing civilians under the guise of targeting Hezbollah members. It was just after that Trump went rogue. Take a look at this.
Without us, without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a great country. It was a country where you had professors, doctors, lawyers. The great intellect was in Lebanon. Now it's terrible. I would say of all countries, they've been treated the worst. And they can't defend themselves. And they have Hezbollah, which is a problem for them. So, no, I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. They should have been able to do the job faster. It just goes on forever. And when that happens, it throws a negative light on the big deal, and that's the deal with Iran. So when you ask me about Bibi, an unbelievable relationship. But Israel would have been blown up a long time ago had I not gotten involved.
I love Bibi, but Israel would have been blown up a very long time ago. I should have started this story by saying, and now for some good news.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. Only Trump does this. Only Trump does this. We can talk about Mark Carney being impressive, or even Pedro Sanchez, but only Trump has this gift of just, I don't want to use improper language here, but just publicly humiliating even people who are seemingly close to him. And in the case of Netanyahu, that's quite amusing. And apposite, by the way, because he's responsible for awful things. It's true though, right?
I mean, I still think the most interesting thing there is him saying that Lebanon is the most hard done by country in the region, that they have no ability to defend themselves because they're kind of a demilitarized state to some degree, and everyone just keeps bombing them. I think I haven't heard an American president sort of express that much sympathy with Lebanon before, saying this used to be a brilliant place, sort of like a cradle of civilization.
The Paris of the East.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just been screwed over by its neighbors. He should act on that.
He probably wants to build some condos there in a Trump hotel, and that's what he's playing for, right? But on Netanyahu, it does kind of feel like we've had these conversations for so long. Back in the day, when this was Biden and Israel was prosecuting a genocide against the people of Gaza and the West Bank, but particularly Gaza after 2023, you'd have a leak. There's this memo which has been leaked to the New York Times. Joe Biden says that this can't keep happening. And you're meant to vote for Biden because he's the progressive candidate. I'm not American, so I don't vote for either of them. But then you have, Trump going so much further by saying that we are responsible for your security as a country. You would not exist without us. And by the way, this is really important. They wouldn't exist without America. This is not some ultra-left, anti-Zionist talking point. Without American interceptor missiles, without American anti-missile technology, Iran would flatten Israel. Now, of course, you might say, well, Israel has nukes. Israel would nuke Iran. Maybe. I have no idea. By the way, the day that any country, least of all Israel, uses nukes, it's over. it's over. We're going to have, proliferation of nuclear weapons. The world and its wife will start developing them. And I suspect in that kind of world, Israel won't last very long. But anyway, people are scared to say that, right? Everyone in American politics is scared to say that simple truth, which is that Israel wouldn't exist without American support, certainly wouldn't have survived the wars of the last couple of years. Yet he's saying it.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is a high variance candidate, right? So in terms of comparing him to Joe Biden wouldn't have helped Netanyahu invade Iran, right? Joe Biden liked to some degree, sort of reduce risks, right? He wasn't putting any serious limits on Netanyahu, which will be to his discredit and his eternal shame, given that Israel was carrying out a genocide. But also, he wasn't really into sort of actively trying to provoke an escalation, whereas Donald Trump was brought into that war against Iran, which I don't think Biden would have been done, would have happened to Biden. And if that war had been easy, if they just won it, then Trump would have given Netanyahu everything he wanted. And Iran might become a failed state. It would be a complete disaster for the Iranians. But that relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv would have been stronger than ever. The problem is that war hasn't gone to the Americans' plan, and Donald Trump has no sense of loyalty really to anyone. So he is willing now to speak much more aggressively about Israel than Biden was. But it's high variance. You see what I mean?
The loyalty to anyone as well includes his son, of course, who he said he'd known for a long time. He didn't go to his wedding quite recently, which is, if you're not going to your own son's wedding, then I wouldn't really count on the guy if I was the leader of a country. But it is fascinating, isn't it? They could not exist without us. If I said that on BBC Newsnight, people would be saying that's outlandish. He's saying it's true. It's completely true. The 2026 World Cup is underway. We are 5 days in, and so far, there have been no dud matches. That includes Scotland-Haiti, which I did stay up to watch. Good first half, not so good with the second half. And while a match in the early hours of this morning wasn't the best game we've seen so far, it did feature 4 goals, I should say. It was perhaps the most politically charged. Iran versus New Zealand was the second game in Group G and ended 2-2. But some of the most interesting action was off the pitch, both before and after the game. Ahead of the tournament, FIFA had stated that the old monarchist flag, featuring a sun and a lion, would not be welcome inside the Los Angeles Stadium. But that didn't stop some people from trying.
This flag is a prohibited item, so if you want to keep it, then you can go back to your car and put it in your car. But if you want to stay and enjoy the match, we do need you to hand it over to us. So you're not allowed to take pictures of the flag.
I'm not taking a picture. I'm recording this conversation because we're suing FIFA because of this.
Obviously.
It's the freedom of speech. It's the freedom of expression. We're living in the United States.
So, it's a prohibited item. I'm pretty sure you were told that when I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm saying if you want to stay and enjoy the match, you can surrender it to me. Or if you'd rather keep the flag, which is your prerogative, by all means, you just have to take it back to your car.
With all
what's wrong with the flag?
Nothing.
what's wrong with no, they're like lion kids like that on the show. Where?
Okay, so it's really as simple as you want to keep the flag.
No, we're gonna keep the flag.
She tried. Poor lady, doing a good job, I thought, under tough conditions. Ahead of the match, the flag of both teams was spread across one half of the pitch. In Iran's case, that of course meant the flag of the country after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Both before and after the match, there was name calling and even fighting between those supporters who back Reza Pahlavi and others who either don't, maybe they oppose him, or simply have no strong opinions. Here's one video of monarchists shouting a torrent of abuse at a German Iranian man.
طرفدار جمهوری اسلامی بابا کی گفتم چی حرفی بگو جاویدشا جاویدشا اصلا معنیش چیه من فارسی به این خوبی نیست من آلمان به دنیا آمدم بگو جاویدشا یعنی چی جاویدشا بگو پرچم شیر و خورشید بگی دسته پرچم شیر و خورشید بگی نه بابا بیا پرچم شیر و خورشید بگی پرچم شیر و خورشید بگی بیا پرچمو بگی یا پرچم شیر و خورشید بگی دسته بیا بگی دسته بیا بگی دسته بیا بگی دسته چونی گیر تو کاست ننت
You think these people can run a multi-party democracy? Really? This poor man, German Iranian, he's saying, I can't speak very good Persian. His Persian's very good, much better than mine. And he's speaking German towards the end of that clip. The man's saying, take the flag. He said, I don't want to take the flag. He's very calm. And then he goes, F your mother. There's somebody walking around with a placard saying, fuck Islam. They're giving him the finger. He just wants to watch a football match with his family. I mean, calm down. By the way, there's lots of people. He might even support you. Not after that. Then there was this interview between an Iranian-American supporter of Team Melli and a camera crew.
How do you feel about this massive match with New Zealand?
I mean, I'm pretty excited. I want to see how the national teams go up against each other.
This is not our flag.
Yeah,
this is the Islamic Republic's
No,
flag.
Pops, it's okay.
This is not our flag.
We're gonna have
this is the Islamic
Pops,
Republic's
don't yell at her.
flag.
It's okay.
That's what's playing over here.
Don't yell at her. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We're gonna have a lot of problems with these flags. Personally, I'm keeping politics out of football. I'm gonna go enjoy the country and our culture and the sport, and may the best team win. You know, it's just good spirits. It comes every 4 years. You know.
Why do you think there are these problems with the flags? Is it just what's?
It's political warfare back there. You know, it's a country divided right now, and I'm just choosing not to include in that energy for today. You know, that's not needed today. Yeah.
Finally, what do you think of the New Zealand team?
I have not watched New Zealand, but I've heard that they've had a pretty good squad, and they just got a good victory against who? They just played someone. My friend was telling me that they had a good
They
victory.
played England. It wasn't a victory. It was a 1-0 loss, so we're happy with that. England's good.
Yeah.
But Iran's a pretty good team, aren't they?
We are, as it terms to like the region, but whenever we're facing European teams or outside of our continent, we're like defensive heavy and long balls, so it's not the comfiest wins when we do win. So I have a feeling it's going to be a lot of that today. Parking the bus and long balls and headers. Yeah.
Good luck. I hope you enjoy the occasion.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
What a nice guy. And it's true, Iran plays what the kids are now call haram ball. Arteta-style football, not the nicest to watch necessarily, although Arteta actually wins. What a nice young man. We'll talk about it more in a moment. Then there was this video of a man being hectored, and apparently he's not even Iranian.
You rent your mom! You rent your mom! Sugar daddy! You rent your mom for money! You like Palestine? You rent your daddy? But you rent everybody! Sugar daddy! Oh, Islamic Republic, you make no sense! You make no sense! Terrorists! Terrorists! That's enough, man. Go! Terrorists, go! Come on.
These people just want to watch football matches.
Really, really bizarre. I mean, they have effed up, right? The Iranian monarchy. I mean, it's similar to the previous story we're talking about with Netanyahu, which is they've taken this massive gamble, which is they've sort of supported Trump to go into this war, which just like Netanyahu, actually, the Iranian monarchists had been telling sort of the American government, if you go in and start this war, the regime will crumble, and then the people who back Pahlavi will just take over, and it will be easy as pie. Now, what has happened is that Donald Trump now looks at Netanyahu and says, I think you misled me. He looks at these Iranian monarchists, thinks, you've misled me also you're mad. And now they're just, I suppose, committed to alienating as many people as possible.
But I say this to somebody who's half Iranian, it feels like this may be the most useless social movement in history. You know, Iran International, this fake news channel that's a pro-Pahlavi news channel, they've spent £600 million. You know, people talk about GB News, which is sometimes gets bigger numbers than BBC News, Sky News. They've spent tens of millions of pounds. I think maybe 100 million over 3 or 4 years. Iran International has spent £600 million. And it feels to me that the Iranian monarchist movement, and to be clear, many Iranians aren't happy with the government and the Iranian state. Of course, I'm not saying that for 1 minute. But this movement, particularly around the flag and Pahlavi, has to be up there, has to be all-time a GOAT. These guys, the Boston Celtics, the New York Yankees, Manchester United in 1999, the Arsenal Invincibles, of bad social movements. It's like they're trying to actively alienate as many people as possible. It's extraordinary. Take the flag. I'm okay, thank you. He's being very nice. Fuck you. F your mother. How are you going to win? How are you going to run a country behaving like that? And here's the thing. People can talk about Iran today as it is, as it's been since 1979. My view is, and I think many people agree with this that I speak to, these people would be worse. These people would be substantially worse. They're racist, they're Islamophobic, they're bigots, they're xenophobic. By default, that final video of a dude just walking with some headwear, that means they can talk about his mum and money and terrorists and FU. These aren't kids. These are guys in their 40s, their 50s. There are women in their 60s and their 70s doing this stuff. Michael, I can't get my head around it. And I suppose for you, you're one of these people that says, look, don't look at X isn't real. Social media isn't real. And if you base your politics on what you're seeing on these social media platforms, you're going to make some really bad mistakes. And it does feel like the Pahlavi movement is the paradigmatic example of that now. They've just built this echo chamber. They take it offline. And if you don't agree with them, you're out. They're not interested in persuasion. They're not interested in building a broader political coalition.
Yeah, it's kind of second referendum coded. Although, I mean, people could say this about lots of left-wing movements as well, right? Although this one seems particularly, I suppose, outlandish because it's so divorced from reality. I mean, I think there is always this danger. I mean, there was the same thing before the Iraq War, wasn't there? When you've got a movement which is outside the country, a diaspora movement, which has really strong political opinions and makes quite outlandish claims to represent a population which they can't really back up. And I don't really get the psychology of it. I know you think about these guys a lot more than I do, but do you think they genuinely think that this is a way to try and bring about sort of regime change in Iran? Is it to kind of build up social cachet in their own social circles? You know, is this sort of them virtue signaling to people who are like them for status? Or do they think that there is some outcome here that's going to make a difference?
I think it's all a function of online and social media stuff, particularly in Iran International. I think they now think that's like a majoritarian position. And it's not. It's many people, but of course you need to become a majority to win. You need to become politically hegemonic, but they don't think in those terms.
And you're not going to become a majority by openly supporting Trump and Netanyahu.
And
saying F Islam.
You're not going to become hegemonic by saying that we need to get rid of the religion this country's had for 1,400 years, by telling people to F their mothers if they just won't hold your flag, by identifying yourself with the number one most unpopular country in the West, which is Israel, and tying yourself to a president who, if you don't like the guy, you hate him. It just doesn't seem very smart. So you don't think the tactics are working? Neither do I. I do quite like this idea of you saying it's second referendum coded. I was always a critic of the second referendum stuff. It was never quite that bad. Besides divisions among the fans, there are, of course, the players, with senior voices from the Iranian side commenting on their unique treatment in this tournament. Speaking to the BBC, head coach Amir Golani said Iran was the, quote, most oppressed team at the World Cup, citing the constantly changing arrangements his players were subject to. He went on to say this. After the game, they said to us, you have to leave immediately. This is after the game against New Zealand. We've been asked to get on a plane and return to our camp in Tijuana. Remember, this is in LA. And we are really troubled by that. They're forcing us to go back early. They're making the situation more and more difficult, more hurdles. But we're not going to let that stop us from doing our best. After the match against New Zealand, Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, went into the Iranian team's dressing room to speak directly to the players.
Tonight was a tough game. With a bit more luck, you win.
امشب بازی سختی بود با یک کم شانس بیشتر نتیجه رو می‌بردین این بازی رو.
But you showed to your families, to your friends, to your people, to the world that you are in the World Cup, that you perform, and you have 2 more games to go.
ولی به خانواده‌تون، به دوستاتون، به دنیا، به جهان نشون دادین که شما تیم تو جام جهانی هستین و 2 تا بازی دیگه هم دارین.
And in these 2 games that you have to go, you will make again everyone in the world proud of what you do.
و تو این 2 بازی هم که دارین همه رو دور دنیا باعث افتخار خواهیم بود براشون.
Thank you for being here.
خیلی ممنون که اینجا بودید.
It's also a big emotion. I know what you go through. I understand. But you are stronger than everything.
احساسات خیلی بزرگه. من درک میکنم شما چه احساساتی دارین، ولی شما از همه این بزرگتر هستین.
And you send a strong message to the entire world.
You send a strong message to the entire world. Now leave. Get on the plane. Okay, bye-bye. This is the same man, of course, Gianni Infantino, who memorably said, and I love this, today I am Qatari, I'm Arab, I'm gay, I'm disabled, I'm a migrant worker. This was all before, of course, giving the World Cup to Qatar. An extraordinary charlatan of a man. But he pulled it off there. It's very convincing. If you didn't know who he was, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, you think, wow, that's really heartfelt. It's not. Finally, the Daily Telegraph published this extraordinary article today. The World Cup's integrity is being eroded by the shameful treatment of Iran. The Daily Telegraph, not The Guardian, not Novara Media. I want to read just one excerpt from that very good piece. When striker Mehdi Taremi calls the situation a disaster, he's not mistaken. As soon as Iran's place in North America was confirmed, it was incumbent on FIFA to clarify that the 3 host nations, the US, Mexico, and Canada, would guarantee every team and official unrestricted access. Even Sepp Blatter, Infantino's profoundly compromised predecessor, described this as a, quote, fundamental principle of organising any World Cup. But in his overwhelming desire to show deference to President Donald Trump, Infantino neglected to uphold the rule. And in the space of a week, he's seen a Somalian referee deported and an Iranian squad shuttled back and forth across a border on the whim of the US government. Michael, what do you make of the Iranian team's treatment at this World Cup?
I mean, it is completely outrageous. And Gianni Infantino says, oh, you're so welcome. Like, it is exactly the same as what he did in Qatar, which is there's no concrete commitments, but it's this, like, just insane virtue signaling. I feel gay. I feel disabled. You are welcome. Now leave, please. I mean, the Somalian referee, there were loads of sort of defenders saying, no, this is because he was on a diplomatic visa. He was just on the incorrect visa. Of course he got deported. But the quote you read there, that's why people going to the World Cup are on a diplomatic visa, because this is a global event. It's not an event which is sort of, it shouldn't be subject to the rules of the host country. It's a global event with global significance, which is why people going to it, not fans obviously, but people who are playing a vital part in it should be on diplomatic visas. Iran, it's not just like, again, I'm not going to pretend to be a good commentator on football as a sport, but from what I've read, it is really severely damaging Iran's chances to compete properly at this World Cup, that they're not allowed to arrive significantly before their matches, and they're not allowed to stay significantly after their matches to have a warm down, right? So they have that game. What they want to do is go straight to a hotel where they can have their warm down, they can have treatments, massages, so that they can limit the possibility that they'll get injuries before the next match. Within 2 hours, they were on a plane to Mexico.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get to the venue 2 days before. They had to come about sort of just under 24 hours before. And the fact that FIFA can't guarantee that after giving Donald Trump the FIFA Peace Prize, I mean, it is just an absolute joke.
He's also going to be giving the trophy away to the winner. This was confirmed today, yeah. So like with the World Club Cup recently, when last year he gave it to Chelsea, or actually earlier this year or last year, he gave it to Chelsea. Cole Palmer's like, what the hell is going on? That will be repeated with the World Cup. Which again is quite extraordinary and a major diplomatic coup for him. You mentioned the Somali referee. The most senior referee in Africa had refereed the final of what is effectively the African equivalent of the Champions League final. I think he's now going to get the European Super Cup. And then you've had the Uzbek team, Uzbekistan national side, was stopped. They were searched, sniffer dogs. Fabio Cannavaro, former Italy captain, Ballon d'Or winner, World Cup winner, Real Madrid captain. is being treated like a drug mule, like a Colombian drug mule. And then even today, the Uruguayan team got the same treatment. Manuel Ugarte, he's not very good, but he cost a lot of money, what, 50 million pounds? He's just looking around, what the hell is going on? This guy's played for PSG, Manchester United. As I've said before, this is the world's first example of negative sports washing. America's reputation is being bashed because it's hosting the World Cup. It's meant to work the other way around, Donald. What are you doing? Although there is a golden thread running through all this, isn't there, Michael? That people have made bad bets geopolitically, and it's really coming home and hurting them, right? Trump, Netanyahu, Infantino, they didn't act from a position of principle. And often people think, well, you won't get found out. Kind of does feel that Infantino will be remembered for this for the rest of his life. Netanyahu probably has screwed up Israel's interests quite substantially. Trump will be remembered for the dumbest American war, maybe in history, actually. There's something there, right?
With three characters who I suppose to some degree represent sort of the worst side of modern politics, which is a complete shamelessness, taking quite big risks and sort of avert corruption. I mean, Infantino, I don't want to get sued, but sort of the places this World Cup has gone, it's in Saudi Arabia in 2 World Cups' time.
Yeah.
We've had Qatar, the United States. I don't know. I think
Russia. So it's an all-time run.
It is an all-time run. No, it's a disaster. Disgrace.
It says a lot about the modern world, which is why we have to change it. Michael, you've been fabulous. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
You have to wait there for a moment.
I'm a little bit bunged up, you might be able to hear. So I'm hoping I wasn't low energy, but allergies, I think, not some kind of infection.
It's also very warm, I should say, although now it's June, so it should be warm. Whereas in May, it was too warm. Thank you for joining us tonight, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.